Manchester, and welcome to another edition of Girard at Large. I am your still working on the Fu Manchu host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. As you know, you can find us online at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, also at Girard at Large, where we encourage you to like us and to follow us. Why? Because we share stuff like what we're going to share tonight, and it's a lot of stuff you probably won't hear anywhere else. But before we get started, we have an eager caller on the line. We have Kathy with us. Kathy, thanks for calling in.
Hi.
How you doing?
Oh, good. How are you, Rich?
Unbelievable. Thanks for calling.
Am I on?
You are.
Oh, okay. Thank you. The reason I'm calling is the other night I was watching the Aldermanic meeting, and when they went into secret session, the TV switched to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And I stayed watching it. I usually don't watch this, but I was horrified at what I saw, and I wanted to ask your opinion if this is the way things usually go. Here's what happened. There were a bunch of people, maybe 30 or 40 abutters from the Holt Avenue area.
Yep.
And they were protesting the giving permission to a
halfway house,
a sober house. And the people that wanted to put the business of the sober house in, presented their case. Well, they presented their case at length, and then the chairwoman of the Zoning Board of Adjustment had the abutters, maybe out of the 30 or 40 that were there, maybe more that were there. There's a huge crowd. Maybe 20 spoke. They all presented very good arguments, but they were all allowed 3 minutes, no more. And so then, after that, the Zoning Board of Adjustment took a vote to grant permission, and it failed. So the next thing to happen would have been a vote to deny. But the chairwoman said, this is not over. And she then proceeded to try to persuade the people that voted against to vote for. And she wasn't convincing them. And so then she invited the people that wanted to put in the sober home. They had good reasons for wanting a sober home. There was nothing, nobody spoke against a sober home, but the people that lived there had good reasons for not wanting it there. They had very good reasons, in my view, for not wanting it there. And they weren't being mean at all. So the chairwoman then asked the people that wanted it, the business people and their attorneys, and she had with her board a guest on her side that chimed in, a real estate person. And so she allowed the petitioners to keep on persuading. And if they said something the 30 or 40 abutters didn't like, she wouldn't allow them to respond. They had no more input. But she kept allowing the petitioners to respond to every objection the other guys had made. And then they get down to this one issue, and I'm going to try to be quick because I'm taking up too much of your time. They get down to this one issue of one of the 5 criteria for allowing this home to come into this neighborhood. It was public interest. And the chairwoman suggested a variation of what public interest meant and asked the petitioners, the business people, what they thought. And they said public interest would be, well, the public interest of the whole of Manchester, the whole state of New Hampshire, of everybody that has an interest in a sober home. And that was read into the record, that new definition. And she then massaged it some more, allowed the petitioners to keep on talking and not allowing the butters to have any more say, and got the vote to go through. And to me, it just did not seem like this was real democracy in action.
Well,
and I don't know if you've had experience with this or what you think, but I wanted to ask your opinion.
Well, I have had experience with this very issue before the zoning board. I've appeared along with 2 different neighborhoods on 3 separate occasions on these very sober home things. And if you caught last week's show, I warned that the recent change to the ordinance, where if it involves a sober living facility, that one of the key criterion, that is, the zoning does not impose a hardship on the property. In other words, the property can be used as its zone, got removed, and I said that was going to have consequences across the city. But so it is highly irregular. In fact, I can't think of a time in my 30 years stalking the halls of City Hall, I cannot think of a time where after a vote has been cast that the chair tries to twist arms, brings the petitioner back, and continues to allow one-sided testimony, if any testimony at all. Usually when a vote is cast, it's done. And they don't need to take a second vote if it fails, because if the motion to approve does not pass, then the variance is rejected. You don't need a motion specifically to decline, although I suppose they could do that. Now, I was going to talk about this tonight, Kathy, because among the other irregularities that were taking place was June Trisciani, who was there as an alternate on the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, she was not seated on this case. For those of you who don't know, the Zoning Board of Adjustment has 5 regular members and 2 alternate members. And an alternate sits on a case when, for whatever reason, one of the 5 full members of the board are not present, or there's a conflict of interest, and there's a reason why they shouldn't be sitting on the case. And there's a reason why we call it a case, because the zoning board is a quasi-judicial board. And as a quasi-judicial board, they are there to make to take testimony. They are there to give the petitioner the opportunity to state their case. They are there to give the neighbors, the abutters who will be affected, the opportunity to state their case. And once all of the information has been presented, there's a motion and they take a vote. Once that vote is taken, the matter is over. And so what the chair did was highly irregular, but also very improper, was that June Trisciani, an alternate member who was not sitting on this case, was also asking questions and trying to persuade members of the board to do this. And to top it off, word has gotten to me that Mayor-elect, or not Mayor-elect, but Mayor Rue made known to the planning board that, not the planning board, the planning department, which serves as staff to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, that he favored the project, and that pronouncement, I'm told by reliable sources, was relayed to members of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So there were a bunch of things here that are just flat out wrong. I worked for a mayor for 6 years. I never once remember him picking up the phone, calling any members of the zoning board, or calling over to the zoning board staff to say, hey, tell the board I want this project, or I want this project killed. Didn't do it. If he had anything to say about it, which was extremely rare, he went there and testified as a city official, as in this case, Joe Lavasser and Crissy Kantor did on behalf of those residents in opposition to it. But now we've learned that the mayor was making his desires known behind the scenes, and what June Trisciani piping up, also improper. She's sitting there as a judge. She's She's not even seated on the case. Zip it. Zip it is what she should have done and didn't do. And so, yeah, it would seem that the residents of Holt Ave got sandbagged by a political agenda, which, if you think about it, there was an attorney in town whose firm often appears before the Planning and Zoning Board, who opposed June Trisciani's appointment to the zoning board for this very reason, this kind of advocacy of political positions rather than taking the cases based on their facts. And not for nothing, Trisciani, there was an item on the Board of Mayor and Aldermen agenda regarding Hallsville School. Well, it got pulled and sent back to committee. But in the run-up to the meeting, Trisciani, a zoning board of adjustment member, who would likely be, whose board would likely hear a change of use, was lobbying the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to approve the project that got referred back to the back to committee so it could be worked on. And so she's been on the board not even 2 weeks, and she's already had 2 high-profile incidents where she is clearly out of line. She either doesn't understand what her role is as a member of the zoning board, or she could give a damn what her role is, and she is actively pursuing political objectives from that board. It's entirely wrong. That neighborhood got hosed, and they ought to know that their newly elected mayor wanted that project to go through, made it known to the zoning board, which maybe explains why the chair of the zoning board kept pushing and pushing and pushing until the vote got, the outcome that was desired in this case.
It just seems she was very, very rude to the people that were there with their really heartfelt arguments, and none of them were being mean to the cause. None of them. They just had good reasons for it not wanting to be in that neighborhood, I thought she was very, very rude to them and really manipulative. And I don't know who she is. I have no idea who she is. But I thought
her name is escaping me.
I thought it was a terrible thing for Manchester, and I just wanted to know. And I do thank you for expounding on it. But I guess there's nothing those people can do now?
Well, no, there is. My understanding is they're probably going to come forward and they're going to file a motion for reconsideration. And I have a pretty good gut feeling that if the zoning board doesn't reconsider the matter, meaning take it up again and reverse the vote, they'll probably end up in Superior Court. And given the highly irregular proceedings and the totally improper interjection by people who weren't even listening, who weren't even seated for the case, I would say that the neighborhood's on pretty solid ground to overturn this miscarriage of justice.
Well, I thank you, Rich, and I'm sorry to take up so much of your time, but I felt terrible seeing that this is going on in Manchester. Yeah,
well, I have a feeling you're going to see more of it, but thanks for calling in, Kathy. Appreciate you sharing it and asking what I thought.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, too. Thank you.
All righty.
Bye.
Happy New Year. All right. If you want to call in, it's 603-640-3091. So there, Kathy got us off to a good start on one of our topics. And so, the neighbors on Holt Ave got completely screwed by those highly improper proceedings. But that's okay, because I think what we're seeing here, and I warned you about this during the campaign, there's going to be very little difference between what Jay Ruhe does on the homeless issue than what Joyce Craig and the prior Board of Mayor and Aldermen did on the homeless issue. And this is just one example, except this is actually kind of worse because, when neighborhoods were up in arms over sober homes coming into their neighborhood, and at least, I'm not sandbagging the people who proposed this sober home. I actually give them credit for going through the process the right way. The sober homes that I've been involved with didn't do it the right way. They willfully and knowingly violated the city's zoning ordinances. They were protected by people like then Fire Chief Dan Goonan, who is now an alderman from Ward 2, who refused to enforce the various codes that should have been enforced because he thought these people needed a safe place to live. Not saying that they don't, but not his call. He doesn't get to decide what laws get enforced or not enforced or which ones are right or which ones aren't. If he has a disagreement with it, he should resign and let somebody who doesn't do the job. But you're going to see more of this because what ends up happening is... as I was saying, at least Joyce Craig, especially the one on Grand Ave, when she went to the neighborhood, she said she was opposed to it. When a couple of these things went to the zoning board, she said she was opposed to it. Now you've got Roué coming in on the other hand and actually saying he's for these things, which is fine. But and again, I give them credit for going through the proper process up front. But the way the process was handled by what is a quasi-judicial body with set rules of procedure, which were clearly violated in multiple ways, is setting a very bad precedent for how these things are going to happen. And while we're on the topic of Roué and this thing, he's expanded something called the continuum of care. See, Jay Roué believes it is the city of Manchester's responsibility, duty, and obligation to solve the homeless problem. He wanted to become what's called the lead agency. In other words, the primary organization that is organizing everybody around the city to address all of this homelessness. And he sent out a press release, which of course made the local media earlier in the week. And unfortunately, when I was grabbing my papers, I didn't grab that one, so I'm not going to quote it or anything. But essentially what he did was he appointed 15 more members. So here we are, right? One of the things that, Victoria Sullivan attacked Joyce Craig over when she was running for mayor was that, well, we need to coordinate all of our nonprofits. And Joyce Craig would sit there and say, well, we have been doing that. So what's your issue? I mean, what more coordination do you want to do? Well, Jay Roué apparently wants to expand the bureaucracy, expand the committee, the continuum of care, this organization that allegedly is addressing the homeless problem because he believes it's the city's responsibility, duty, and obligation to solve the homeless problem, which means he is now putting the city, 15 more members are being added to a group that's already bigger than most, small towns in the area. But he's being very bipartisan about it. We've got members of Shaheen's staff, members of Pappas's staff, members of Margaret Wood Hassan's staff, 3 aldermen, various other members of city government, more nonprofits, banks. We got all of these groups that, to me, I'm looking at half of them and wondering, what in God's name, why does somebody from a local bank need to be on a continuum of care committee, right? I'm sure someone will educate me about that. But, it's kind of like, his 35-person or whatever it was inaugural committee that really didn't do anything, but it gave him a press hit, sent it out. And who are the aldermen? Goonan, the fire chief who refused to enforce the codes, who took policy and rulemaking into his own hands, made the decisions of elected officials. Crissy Kantor, who's going to lose her mind, and I'm drawing a blank on who the third person is off the top of my head. But this is just going to be more of the same BS. If you want to solve the vagrancy problem in the city of Manchester, what you do is what Roué promised be done, and that is start enforcing the laws. Well, we haven't seen any moves towards enforcing the laws. We haven't seen any moves along that line, but what we are seeing are press releases about, hey, we're going to add 15 members and counting, because there will be more, to this vast network of social service agencies that are addressing the homeless problem. How's that worked out so far? That was the exact approach that Joyce Craig. This is like, these people will say, all we need to do is spend more money. All we need to do is have more people on the committee and it will get done. Yeah, no. It's not going to happen. So we're going to see more of the same. Now we've got them lobbying for these sober homes, backing amendments to the zoning ordinance that handicap neighborhoods who want to fight these things as they go in. And this, I think, is just going to continue to spiral in a bad direction. And while we're at it, speaking of Alderman Kantor, whose birthday, I believe, is this week, she was cleared of stealing a binder full of personally identifying information from that disaster of a shelter at 39 Beach Street. Turns out that she didn't steal anything. No kidding. The material she was accused of stealing was material sent to her by a whistleblower, by somebody who worked at that shelter, that emergency shelter, now the engagement center, where you can get all-day coffee. So the woman who was accused of stealing something actually had information sent to her by a whistleblower who was pointing out that the facility was being run poorly and with zero oversight by Adrian, I'm too qualified to do this job, Boulogne, and that it was a train wreck. Now, Alderman Kantor did not release any of the information she received to anybody, but it turns out that this is really strange because, after the whistleblower sent the information, somehow Fire Chief Cashin, who oversees Adrian, or at the time oversaw Adrian, I'm too qualified to do this job, Boulogne. She actually said that. We showed the video once upon a time. And filed a complaint against Alderman Kantor with the city solicitor's office. So how did it get from the city solicitor's office? Well, first of all, how did it get to I almost said Alderman Cashin. How did it get to Chief Cashin? I'm still looking into that. But more importantly, how did it get to Rosanna McMahon, who I can tell you is a heinous you-know-what from hell, heinous you-know-what troll from hell, who there are a lot of nasty people on Facebook, but none more nasty than Rosanna McMahon. I cannot tell you. I mean, I take a lot of abuse on Facebook, and most of it doesn't bother me, but she's the type of person who you block. And then she sets up another account, and she's at it again. I have blocked her more times than I have blocked anybody else combined in the, 18 years that I've had a Facebook account. That's saying a lot. And all she does is just make up stuff, attack. I cannot describe or otherwise put into words how vile this woman is. In any event, the real question becomes, how did it get to Rosanna McMahon? Did Chief Cashin leak it to somebody? No doubt the city solicitor notified the mayor of the complaint. Did Joyce Craig leak it to somebody to harm Alderman Kantor in the coming election? Funny how many months did it take for this to be resolved, right? And of course, after the election, it's all done. So the real question, in my opinion, is who leaked this? It was all hush-hush. It was being investigated. Remember, nobody could talk about it until Kantor herself hired a lawyer, right? So what's going on? My information is, by the way, that Rosanna McMahon is going to find out that the threats of prosecution for filing false charges and a lawsuit, and I hope she sues. And I'll tell you why I hope Kantor sues. I hope Kantor sues because it's called discovery. The process of obtaining information for the lawsuit will help us determine exactly who got the information to McMahon. McMahon will say, oh, well, I didn't know it was false. It came to me from so-and-so. But Crissy Kantor got a birthday present, cleared of all wrongdoing. She didn't steal anything, but we know that, didn't we? No, she received information from a whistleblower who was complaining about how poorly run the facility was. Ain't that something? And not for nothing. Roué going into Ward 6 and by telling the planning staff that he supported the application of that sober home on Holt Ave. It was real smack in the face to Crissy Kantor, who supported her residents, supported her neighborhoods. I don't think there's anybody in the city who worked harder to elect Jay Roué than Crissy Kantor, and I'm sorry to see that he's repaid her support in that way. But there it is. We have it. Okay, some school district news, and we're going to tie it right to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Did you know that the school board, are you sitting down for this? Because, Wilson School, and by the way, those of you who call it the Wilson Street School, it's not the Wilson Street School. It's the Henry Wilson School, Henry Wilson being a Manchester native and a vice president of the United States. 603-640-3091. If you know who the president was that Henry Wilson served under, we'll invite you to call in. Anyway, so the school board, they're up to their shenanigans. On January 8th, the school board has a fiscal policy that requires the board to approve any finalized requests for proposal above $50,000. As written here, however, it is believed that repeating this process for the numerous parts of the $290 million Phase 1 plans could threaten to delay construction. So the Board of School Committee wants to change the policy so that instead of every construction contract that would be over $50,000 needing board approval, that they just be allowed to do it without the board's approval. Don't worry. There's only $290 million that's going to be spent. So none of those contracts are going to be seen by the board before they're approved. Or actually, none of those contracts is going to go to the board for approval. Ain't that something? But don't you worry. The request comes after the SMMA, that's the company, the architect, project manager Jennifer Susi informed the school district superintendent Jen Gillis that 6 modular buildings with electric heating could be purchased at a discounted combined cost of $16,665,816. The district has sought to purchase these buildings instead of renting them with the expectation of cost savings and their use, timelines and deadlines. So, let me put this in perspective for you. Just let me walk this back for a minute. We have to close Wilson School. It's bad. It's bad. It's so bad that it's so bad that Smith Road School and Gosler Park School scored considerably worse on the facilities study done in 2021 than Wilson School. But we have to close Wilson School. But because we're going to close Wilson School and there are nowhere to send those kids until we build the shiny new Beach Street School, we need modular classrooms, super modern modular classrooms. But don't you worry, we're not going to call them portable classrooms because portable would stigmatize them. So instead of spending the $3.5 million that was recommended to upgrade Wilson School, we're not only going to spend $80 million on a brand new school, we're now going to spend $17 million on portable classrooms to house the kids from Wilson School until the new school is built. That $17 million would not only fully renovate Wilson School 5 times over, but it would renovate Beach, Gosler, and Smith and have money left over. So rather than spend $17 million bringing those 4 schools up to standard, we're going to buy portable classrooms, drop them in the parking lot at Beach Street School so we can close it, close the Henry Wilson School, then close the Beach Street School after we've built an $80 million school to house them. So how much is that school now? Is it $80 million, or do we add the $17 million for the portable classrooms and now say that $97 million for that one transaction covering those 2 schools? For that $97 million, you literally could do every renovation recommended by the 2021 study to every school in the district and have about $5 million left over. These are the wizards of smart that are running your school district. And not for nothing, you're taking away the last neighborhood school to which the vast majority of kids can walk to in Wilson School so that you can truck them over there. But don't you worry, it's all part of a greater plan. And the greater plan is once you have Beach Street School vacated, then they're going to tear it down so that they can build a new high school on that site. Now, how do I know this? Well, Alderman Tony Sapienza at the last meeting said that he made a motion to prevent the destruction of the JFK Arena because there were rumors, his word, not mine, rumors that they were going to take JFK down to make way for a new high school. And he doesn't support that, so he put that in. Well, Tony, with all due respect, those of us who came before the board, those of us who watched the school board meeting, know it's not a rumor. We know that they have already received presentation of not one, but two potential site plans of a new high school for the Beach Street School site once Beach Street School has been torn down and removed from where it currently is located. Estimated cost right now is $376 million. We'll call it $400 million because by the time they get it done, it'll be $400 million. That's the so-called phase 2 of the school plan. So these are not rumors. These are presented materials, which, if you were paying attention to what was sent to you at the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, they included the bonding schedule for that $400 million project in the presentation they gave about phase 1. Of course, the other funny thing is watching Tony Sapienza say that he voted for phase 1. He voted to spend $300 million, even though phase 1 wasn't defined. He didn't know what it was going to do, but hey, the schools asked for it, so there it is. Very surprising, but Sapienza was one of the 8 aldermen who voted for a motion that was the source of considerable debate at the Board of Mayor and Aldermen about whether or not the school board should pause phase 1. So we're going to get to that right now because this is a big deal. Let's review. Remember, I was, as we would say in my side of town, side by each with myself, me, when I was watching all of this stuff go before the lame duck session of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And Mayor Rouet was doing a see no evil, hear no evil on the question of this bond issue. And I have it on fairly good authority that well, let me get to that in a minute. But, so the bonds went through. There was all these machinations and clearly they were just trying to jam it through. So Alderman Ed Sapienza at Tuesday night's meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen made a motion to revoke the board's approval, essentially, of the project. They need 10 votes by state law to rescind the bond. They don't have the 10 votes. At least they don't think they have the 10 votes. If it were me, quite honestly, I would put the motion forward and I would make them vote because the idea that this thing should go through is crazy. In any event, so that led to a big, long discussion. The city solicitor and the mayor wanted to go, as Kathy said, into secret session to discuss with their attorneys whether or not, what the board legally could do to influence or affect the school board's vote. Now, I don't believe it should have been in non-public. I get it. When you want to talk to your attorney about a potential legal matter, it should be done in non-public session. But we're talking about what the board's authority. They should have discussed what the RSAs were, what the board's authority was over the school board. And I can tell you, having served on both boards, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen cannot directly tell the school board what to do. It just can't. So what the board did ultimately was it approved a motion that essentially asked the school board to hold off on moving forward with these projects until the current Board of Mayor and Aldermen has been fully briefed on what that $300 million is going to do. And I know many of them on that board want to see what phase 2, and if there's a phase 3, what it's going to look like. There won't be a phase 3, by the way. They're going to wrap all of the rest of the schools into phase 2 because they said that phase 2 will address the high schools and the other 11 elementary schools in the city. It's just the high school all by itself is a $400 million project. So imagine what they're going to do, given what they've done for Wilson, Beach, and the four middle schools. It's kind of funny because no one was talking about, everyone was focused on Wilson and Beach, but nobody was talking about the $50+ million that are going to be spent on each of the middle schools to put additions onto those buildings that already have more seats than they have kids and are going to have more and more seats than they have kids because enrollment is continuing to plunge in the city of Manchester, right? So you can imagine what it's going to cost to fix the other 11 elementary schools if they're spending $300 million on just 2 elementary schools and the 4 middle schools and $400 million on just a high school. Okay? You think your taxes are high now, and don't you worry, we're going to get to what they're looking at already for the budget with the tax cap. So, of course, this, and it passed this motion, essentially saying to the school board, don't go any further until you make a presentation to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. This board needs to understand what's going on because it's going to have to deal with the budget impacts, right? It's like, maybe I wasn't a voice crying in the wilderness. Well, this, of course, got Jim O'Connell, the vice chairman of the school board. It got his Irish hackles up. The resolution that passed is unenforceable. I think it was playing politics with the school children and families of Manchester. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen doesn't have any authority over the school district and the way in which education is delivered in the city of Manchester. As vice chair and just one vote on the school committee, as far as I'm concerned, there will be no pause. Oh, yeah. There will be no pause. Not for nothing. I've worked in the mayor's office. I've been an alderman. I've been a school board member. I was also on the charter commission. If I were the mayor or I were on the board of mayor and aldermen, I would very quickly, in light of Mr. O'Connell's comments, remind the school board that it is the board of mayor and aldermen that has authority over the budget. And no, he's right. They can't, once they have the money, they can't tell them how to spend it. Once they've approved a project like they did, and Bill Berry kept saying during that conversation, well, I wrote it down. Bill Berry, where is it? Oh, yes, we're not the school board. This doesn't belong. No, you're not the school board, Bill. But honestly, if you'd done your job when they came before them and you asked a question, you showed any... You may not be the school board, but you're not a rubber stamp. There's a reason why there's a separation between the budget and bonding authority and the policy-making authority of the school board. And it's so when stuff like this comes forward, there can be a real, genuine discussion. Can you imagine if a city department head, if the police chief came in and said, hey, listen, I need $100 million worth of facilities. Police chief, did I say that out loud? He's the police chief. We ought to just give him what he wants. We're not the cops. The police commission's in favor of it. Ain't that something? They wouldn't do that. They don't do that when the city departments come forward, and it's about time they started recognizing that they have the same responsibility to hold the school board accountable and to make sure it provides them with everything they need to make a decision and to justify the recommendations that they're making. They have every bit the responsibility to do that with the schools as they do with any other department that answers directly to them, because when it comes to the budget, the schools answer directly to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Period. Full stop. End of story. There's no discussion or debate about that. So these aldermen like Barry and Pat Long, whatever the schools want, that it's their job to run the schools. We're just going to give them what they ask for. Really? Well, aren't you useful? Said no one ever. So now, playing politics with the vote. And of course, they're all outraged that the alderman never called, never asked, never did this, never did that. Oh, it's the position. It went 8-6. So who were the 8 who supported this motion? It was Lavasser, Terrio, former school board member, Ed Sapienza, Kantor, Vincent in Ward 11, Kelly Thomas, who spoke very well. She was on the school board, and she brought to light the fact that, the school board that she sat on, and I was privileged to sit on the school board with her, we worked pretty hard to get rid of all the portable classrooms across the city. Now they're bringing them in, and they say, well, it's only for a specific purpose. But note, they're not renting these portables that they're using. They're buying them. How about that? Oh, don't you worry, Rich. They'll sell them. Like hell they will. Chris Morgan in Ward 1 and Crissy Kantor opposed to asking the schools to come and make a presentation and hold off on doing any more contracts until they were Dan O'Neill, Dan Goonan, Jim Burkish, Bill Berry, Pat Long, and Christine Fajardo. My information is had it been a 7-7 vote, that the mayor would not have voted for it. Look, here's a hard truth about Jay Rouet. Okay, a guy, and I can tell you this for a fact because I've seen them, who's sending out every press release from his office to a statewide media list. I do some consulting work with the Eagle Times newspaper up in Claremont. Imagine my surprise when press releases from the mayor of Manchester start ending up in an email account for a newspaper in Claremont. And I asked his aide, why are you sending this to a newspaper in Claremont? Because it was a press release about him riding on the back of the truck with the trash guys, and he sent out another one. Of course, they all have pictures of him, with the graffiti guys, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, oh, we're sending this out to a statewide media list so that everybody knows what's happening in the city of Manchester. This is a sign of a guy who's getting his name out there as much as he can, as early as he can, before he runs for some other office. So why anybody in Claremont, Berlin, or anywhere else would give a damn that the mayor of Manchester is riding with the trash trucks today is beyond me. But they're sending these press releases out statewide. But I have it on good authority that, look, when it comes to this, he is not going to do anything that Manchester Proud or the Chamber of Commerce doesn't support. Okay, if they're in favor of it, he's going to be in favor of it. He's got too many donors from those organizations, and a guy who clearly has got ambitions that go well beyond mayor of Manchester, right? No guy lives in town for 2 years and says, oh, I love you and I want to be mayor. Now, he looks at it as an opportunity to get elected and then move forward. I actually found out that he was looking to run in 2021, but decided not to when I announced that I was going to run because that would have meant there were 3 Republicans in the race. Apparently, he was ready to go against Sullivan until I got in. So there's a lot that's been at play here, and I'm learning more and more about it. But guys, I hope he does a good job for the city, but when it comes to education, he's not going to push for anything that Manchester Proud doesn't want, or the Chamber of Commerce, which might as well be one and the same. He's totally in their pocket, and he's not going to be, he's not going to be the mayor that you think he's going to be. And we're seeing it early, right? He's just expanding the same bureaucratic efforts on the homeless thing that have gotten us 0 results. He's, in favor of the proliferation of these sober facilities. He sent out a press release the other day, thanking the state for their gracious grant of almost like $1.4 million for affordable housing projects in Manchester. And I thought, well, ain't that something? Because those are affordable housing projects at Joyce Craig. They're the ones that are going to be in the old police station that Joyce Craig lined up. And so I guess we have a politician on our hands taking credit for work that he didn't do. Those grants were already committed to, from what I know. It's not like, he said, hey, we need some extra money. And the state said, oh, sure, Mayor Rouet, here it is. But, and it's a lie. It's a lie that Manchester has a homeless problem because it has a housing shortage. No, Manchester has a vagrancy problem because it has a bunch of drug addicts and mentally ill people who are often one and the same out on its streets because it's got, as a result of all of these sober homes and safe stations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the core of our problem, and it always has been. This problem didn't, And that's a fact. So the idea that, subsidized housing where people who make 30% of the median income, can live is going to do one thing, and that's attract a whole hell of a lot more people to the city who make 30% of the median income. And listen, I've been broke in my life, okay? I don't begrudge anybody anything, but you have to take into consideration the demographic concentration of poverty. Back in the 90s, it was de-densifying was the key to restoring neighborhood health across the inner city. We were taking down more units than we were putting up. And it worked. It was part of the solution to crime. Now we're going in the opposite direction, and it's not going to be good. So, evil aldermen playing politics on a school vote because they wanted a presentation from the school board about the complete facilities plan and what it was going to cost and what was going to go where. It was kind of funny because at some point, I think it was Tony Sapienza said, well, the schools, oh no, wait a minute, Fajardo, Christine Fajardo, Ward 4. She's like, yeah, well, I've been following this stuff and the school board doesn't even know what's going to be in phase 2. Great! So let's fund phase 1, which Sapienza said he didn't really know what was in it because the school board didn't define it. And Fajardo's like, oh, they don't know what's going to be in phase 2 yet, so we'll just have to wait. These are the people who are spending your tax dollars. And speaking of tax dollars, okay, and while we're on the schools, right? So, something you should know, because guys like Jim O'Connell always bellyache about the fact Manchester spends the lowest amount per pupil in the state. It's a shame. It's a travesty. Our children deserve better. Okay, there it is. Well, all of this money that we're going to spend on these buildings, not one penny of it will be counted by the state towards our per pupil spending. Okay? So right now, about $12.5 million, we'll call it 12 to keep the numbers round, is what the city spends on debt. City spends about another 12 on transportation. That's $24 million. City spends about $6 million on school food and nutrition, the school lunch program. That's $30 million that are spent by the Manchester schools. And do you know not one penny of that counts towards the Manchester School District per pupil spending by the state? Okay? Now, you only have 12,000 students. Do the math. You're at what, $2,500 per kid? Not counted, okay, what the city pays in teacher retirement, $13 million. What the city pays in teacher health insurance, $17 million. Those count toward the per pupil spending. But spending money to get them to school, spending money to maintain, renovate, and build their schools, and spending money to feed them, yeah, that doesn't count in the per pupil allocation. So despite the fact that you're going to see an enormous increase in spending, right? $20 million for that $30 million bond. $21 million for that $300 million bond. Another $21 million. So you're talking at one point, the city, according to their own numbers presented to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, $46 million just in principal and interest on the debt for the schools. Not one penny of that $46 million, not one red cent will be counted on the per pupil expenditure. And yet, so guys like Jim O'Connell, despite a massive increase in spending, will still run around and say, oh, we're depriving our kids of an adequate education because we spend so much less per pupil than any other community in the state. Okay? I'm just telling you. So that $46 million plus what? 12 in transportation, there's 58, 6. So there'll be $64 million that will be spent every year if all of this goes through. That won't count towards the per pupil allocation or per pupil spending amount here in the city of Manchester. It's a ruse. Michael, you're on the air. Thanks for calling in. Go ahead, Michael.
They shouldn't get a dime until they can prove that can teach kids how to read. That's all I got to say.
I appreciate it. And you know what? Ross Terrio brought up a great point at the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. He said, when Bob Kraft bought the Patriots and they said to him, well, what are you going to do to improve it? Are you going to get a new coach? No. Are you going to get a new quarterback? No. Well, what are you going to do? I'm going to build a new stadium. They would have laughed at the guy because just building a new stadium doesn't improve the team. Okay? So now, despite the massive increase in spending that they're hiding, Mayor Rue is, if we get these cost overruns in health insurance, we get these $5 million coming in city contracts, and we got all this, we gotta tighten up the budget. He has not said one word about the massive increase in school spending that's coming, and I suspect it's because he's looking at it saying, it's being covered by the $35 million in unexpected increase in state adequacy aid for education that came after the city budget was adopted. So when the state passed the budget, there was a big change to the school aid formula. Manchester got $35 million more in spending in aid than it expected. And the Board of Mayor and Aldermen just said, no, here you go. And they socked it away. Remember the massive increases in the teachers and principals and all of the school union contracts? $13 million. They were patting themselves on the back because they reserved $13 million of the extra adequacy aid for the contracts, and they were patting themselves on the back because in year one they're only going to spend 11 of the 13. Mind you, they got none of it covered in years 2 and 3 of the contract, but so that's going to be covered, and the increase in the bonding for the you're going to see a massive increase in spending on the schools, and they're going to say, but it's not affecting your tax rate. Well, it actually is, because that $35 million legitimately could have been given back to you as the taxpayer to cut your taxes by, I did the numbers, I think it was 18%. It was a $2.65 cut in taxes, if I did it right. But now the numbers are out. And the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, has been announced, and next year the city can increase the amount of money collected in property taxes by 5.63%. Now, don't confuse this with a 5.63% increase in the tax rate. That's not how it works. And Paul Feely, God love him, generally speaking, a good reporter, he always reports what they say. The aldermen say they can a tax cap, you can have a tax rate increase of 5.63%. And he writes that, and then he goes on to say what it really is, and that is how much more you can collect in property taxes. So remember, the schools have a shortfall of their own, because if they had followed the tax cap last year, which was almost 5%, there would have been a $1.4 million cut in spending, because they had a loss of aid due to the decline in student enrollment. And so any loss in non-property tax revenue has to first be covered by the increase in tax revenue before you can increase spending. And that's when they said, we'll just take $3 million out of this trust fund, or maybe it was, I don't remember, it was one of the expendable trusts, or it was the COVID money, and we'll count it as a revenue, which is how they got a $1.6 million increase in spending. Ain't that something? So what you're going to see is, despite the fact that there's at least $35 million in spending, $35 million coming, you're going to see on both the city side and the school side that the tax cap number, they're going to come close to hitting it. The economy is starting to soften. Revenues are starting to wobble. And in addition to all of the contract increases and the debt increases that are coming our way, the schools have $22 million in operating expenses that they took and shifted to COVID funds. Those funds are gone as of the beginning of the next fiscal year. They're gone. I think there's $1 million left, and the city was getting over $30 million a year for the last 4 or 5 years. It was an obnoxious amount of money. They pissed through it all. They've got nothing to show for it except some, $8 or $10 million worth of new heating and ventilation equipment, which includes Beach Street School that they now want to blow up. You can't make this stuff up. And so there are 63 full-time positions. There are $10 million or so in special ed costs, all of which get shifted out of the operating budget onto COVID funds because they just couldn't maintain their operations without that money. Well, that money is gone. And so you get $22 million, give or take, $22 million worth of operating expenses that are that have got to somehow be absorbed in all of this mess. Okay? And even if they somehow pull it off without being, without saying that they have to, exceed the tax cap, right? Even if they could pull it off, just remember that $35 million that came from the state could have been a really big tax cut for you. So it's not true that it's not affecting the tax rate. Okay? So what they should have done with that money, is set it aside, at least initially, for the outstanding construction needs of the school district and done the stuff in cash. Because that $35 million, unless there's another change in the state aid, you're going to get it for at least 2 years, this year and next, because the state runs a 2-year budget cycle. And then after that, God only knows what will be coming. But think about it. With the $70 million that would have come from the state in cash over those 2 years, you literally could have taken care of almost every single recommended upgrade, improvement, repair, expansion, whatever from the 2021 facilities study, not burdened the taxpayers with all of that debt. And then you could have talked about operations if you wanted to. Fact of the matter is, folks, is that the Manchester School District is continuing to lose students. It hasn't been this small ever, really. There was no post-COVID bounce back up in the population. And this is what you've got going on in your city. And not for nothing, just to throw a little teaser out there, it dawns on me that Chief Oldenburg is also some muckety-muck in the New Hampshire National Guard. I've done some digging around. I'm not ready to make any announcements yet, but let's just say I've got some feelers out because I have a feeling that maybe, and I was looking this up today, maybe somebody who's the chief's boss by day might be the chief's subordinate on the weekends. I am your ever humble host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, be good, be well. Don't do anything we wouldn't do. We're proud to have you in the audience. Thanks so much for being there. Good night.